From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Ahead today, a discussion of the opportunities that the grain markets are currently presenting to forward contract new crop production at prices above production costs. That'll be among the topics that K-State's Dan O'Brien takes up during his weekly segment on the grain price trends. Also, from the team at the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State, 2 cow-calf management topics, saving and preserving extra colostrum from the herd during the calving season, and nutritionally managing that herd bull from now to spring breeding time. Contributing there, K-State's Philip Lancaster, Dustin Pendell, Bob Larson, and Brad White. And further ahead, K-State's Mary Knapp checks in for her weekly look at Kansas agricultural weather. Here on Agriculture Today.
Kansas farmers and ranchers are helping feed your family in the world. The largest contributor to the Kansas economy is beef cattle. How do you get that juicy steak on your plate? In order for you to enjoy your tasty meal, it requires the hard work of the producers, marketers, advertisers, processors, inspectors, transporters, packers, and consumers. So thank all these people and sit back, relax, and enjoy your tasty meal.
You're listening to Agriculture Today, our Friday edition. Thanks again for joining us. Well, it's been another week of whipsawing grain prices, and we'll talk about what that means for the markets moving forward. Joined once more by Research and Extension grain market economist Dan O'Brien, and he's based in his office in Colby, northwest Kansas once again today. Dan, you're in the midst, along with colleagues with Extension, in a series of producer meetings and talking over all kinds of perspectives on the markets and on grain marketing strategies here. So plenty to discuss. What have been some of the focal points of those conversations?
Well, for my part, on Wednesday, discussed how forward contract and put option opportunities available in the market, in particular at the Salina and Garden City locations, how they compare to some of the USDA safety net tools that are out there. Again, we just got done with the February time period for determination of projected prices for corn, for grain sorghum, for soybeans, and came out with prices $4.58 for corn as it was calculated based off the average of these futures closes for February. Grain sorghum number is about 4% lower than that. That's their formula, about 96% of the corn. So it's about $4.32, something like that. You know, those are good prices. A lot of years we basically just plug in $4. So this year you're for that D's corn average, 58, 60 cents higher than that. So indicative of where we're at in the market. The soybean number was 11.87. So, compared to 9 or 9.50 or 10, that's a pretty good price. So following on some of the analysis that we learned from our retired colleague Art Barnaby in the past, if you choose, say, a 75% APH, take that times 11.87 for the price, you get not just the coverage for the 75% of the APH, which is covered at fully 11.87 or 4.58, but if you spread that back out to all bushels, assuming APH yields, then you get an idea of what that revenue coming in gives for overall price coverage implicitly. So take 0.75 times those two numbers, and you get something that's closer to $10, $10.40, something like that on soybeans, and closer to $3.25 thereabouts for corn. So that's a safety net. That's how I would view it anyway. And that, of course, you have PLC. That's a safety net also in terms of prices. Art County comes into play, et cetera. So we looked at all that, and without question, the forward contract and put option price coverage that's available in the market certainly higher than what you get out of the USDA safety net. Mm-hmm. There'll be a time when we'll be thankful for that government safety net, no doubt, down the road. But right now, it's these other independent things offer more.
And equally important, those numbers represent prices that exceed production costs, by and large, for producers.
Yes. We were looking at, for corn, for non-irrigated corn, 120 bushels out of Salina, a break-even price of about full cost break-even price of about $3.15, but that's before the inflation that's just been occurring in fertilizer, et cetera. I wouldn't be surprised that's $3.40, $3.50, something like that. The Garden City irrigated corn number at 225 bushels figured at a full cost break-even, including land, about $3.48. I wouldn't be surprised that's $3.75, $3.80 heading for $4 by the time what we have right now. And for soybeans, the great thing about soybeans is if you raise X amount of bushels, you've got a pretty good chance of breaking even. Full cost break even in the Salina area, non-irrigated beans, about 45 bushel an acre, right at $9, just a couple cents under, at about $9.15 for 66 bushels, I think, as I recall, out there in Garden City. So, yeah, $9, $9.15 prices we're seeing for soybeans. If we're selling right now, they're tremendous. The challenge is we're wondering about what our selling price will be next fall. Now, today, from 12 to 1:30, we're talking about grain marketing plans for this year and how to consider protecting some of those prices. No small deal in that, yesterday's closes for March was $14.15, for November $12.30 and a half. For Dees corn, $4.75 and a half yesterday. So, we've got some tremendous places. You combine that $4.75 with 11 over basis in Garden City, $4.87 forward contract price. And wow, what a price. I mean, that's tremendous. And we just said that the break-even price for irrigated corn out there is at least $3.50 and probably heading to $3.80, $4. But $4.87 for the bushels they're talking about. It's a pretty profitable deal.
And by the way, folks, if you'd like to take in this grain marketing workshop online Dan's alluding to there, you can still do so. Find out the details by going right away after this broadcast to agmanager.info. Dan, though you've worked up as part of all of this, a rather interesting look at what history tells us about corn and soybean price trends from this point, early spring, on into the fall harvest period. And there's a message there, you think, that could dovetail nicely into one's marketing plans.
In the long term, looking back 48 years, actually relying on some previous work at Kansas State in the risk management area, you've got in 39 out of 48 years, going back to the early 70s, corn went sideways to lower from February levels into October. And basically, you're looking at the RMA February averages for these futures and comparing that to the October average. Of course, the October average at harvest. So pretty strong trend for sideways to lower prices. If you do forward pricing and you're sideways, well, that's okay. But if you do forward pricing and it goes higher, like it has in 11 out of 48 years, that's a different thing. Soybeans, much more of an even distribution. And this probably has a lot to do with the growth of exports from South America in competition with the United States going to particularly China, but not only China. So it's more of an even thing. If you look at the shorter run view, I guess the shorter run trends are supportive of that long run view. Since basically the drought, the 2012, if you look at 2013 on and look at the range and averages and variation of what the February to October Dees corn changes have been, the average drop has been 48 cents. Now, and the only year that it was positive was last year when it climbed 11. So I guess that's a cautionary tale. But a range from $1.26 down to the low side in that 1 year of 11 cents increase. Soybeans, much more mixed is probably the way to say it. The average decline from November soybean futures at their close in February as opposed to their average closes in October, in February and October. Average drop of 32 cents a bushel. So still tended to go down. A range of $1.71 fall on the low side to $1.38 climb on the other. Basically, we look at measures of variation 3 times plus the variation in those outcomes for soybeans as opposed to corn. So much more risky in terms of all of that. And part of what we're talking about later on today will be the use of ag options. And people will say, oh my gosh, look at the price of those things. And yes, they do cost some money, but we're at such levels of prices giving us opportunities over cost of production and with so much risk in these markets that there's something there to look at. I think even with the higher priced soybean options, which are basically double the price of corn options.
And of course, tied to this is the overarching question, will this year's price trends mirror what we've seen historically? And if anybody had the answer to that, why, they'd be in gravy.
Answer that. We'll get a good clue to the answer of that. March 31st, we have a prospective plannings report, and there's a lot riding on, at least to me, the seeming difference of opinion between what the USDA projected at their outlook conference, which is 5 or 6 million acres more planted, versus what farmer surveys were saying ahead of that, which was corn increasing more than soybeans. How that'll play out is a big thing. And dryness in parts of the country, it's affecting the wheat crop. That's at play out here in the Western Corn Belt for these other crops too. We haven't talked about wheat yet, but if you look at seasonal prices, if we just follow the seasonal trend in the wheat market to see what it typically has done from where we're at now in March through harvest, it's basically gone sideways. It's been sideways for about 20-some years. That's the average trend. And if you look at when there has been upside volatility, it comes in March. And we're just starting March. Right. And that, crop breaks dormancy. Is it going to make it or not? Risk and uncertainty about that. And, the U.S. drought map is pretty dire looking for good chunks of western Kansas. And, there's a reason that yesterday we saw the upfront contract close at 6.12 3/4 for hard red winter wheat, and the July contract closed higher at 6.26 1/4. So market isn't just going to sleep on the production risk that we have right now in the hard red winter wheat market, and some of these issues about wheat feeding and questions about exports that are coming in on the supply demand side.
Well, again, producers, it's worth your while to be part of the conversation at noon today, K-State's latest grain marketing workshop online, and you can register yet at agmanager.info, but don't tarry too much longer. That's coming up in about an hour and a half. Dan, many thanks. Talk to you again next week.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
He's a grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, and our regular guest on Fridays, Dan O'Brien, on the grain market trends here on Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
This is Agriculture Today. Well, cow-calf producers around Kansas are, by and large, now rolling through that spring calving season. We do hope it's going well for those of you locked into that activity right now. As said many times over this broadcast, getting those newborn calves up and nursing is priority one, and when that doesn't happen smoothly, supplemental colostrum may be in order. On the latest Cattle Chat podcast out of the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State, they broached the topic of gathering and preserving colostrum, and they followed up then with some thoughts on prepping that herd bull for breeding time. That'll sneak up on us rapidly enough now. On board for this conversation, veterinarians Brad White and Bob Larson, livestock economist Dustin Pendell, and cattle nutritionist Philip Lancaster. Here's Brad.
A couple questions that we've had from different listeners. What about collecting colostrum? Where should I get that colostrum? And should I try to collect colostrum from my own cows and bank it for the future?
Well, the way I look at that is, if at all possible, I want that calf to get up and suckle the colostrum from his own dam. Where most often that doesn't work very well is if we had a difficult birth, so either a hard pull or a C-section or something like that. So we get back to that scenario where I talked about where the calf is laying down and not going to get up soon, and the mom is not really interested in bonding with that calf. That's a situation where I may get her up, milk out the colostrum, and tube feed the calf and make sure that he gets some colostrum early in life. I don't want to do that with very many calves. That should be the exception, not the rule, where I have to intervene in that case. And so that'd be my favorite. But as you mentioned last week, getting a beef cow up and milking her out, it's really easy to say that sentence. It is not easy to get that accomplished. And so because of the attitude of the cow or the proximity to a chute, that may not even be possible. And in those situations,
the attitude of the cow or the milker,
or the, yeah,
depending on who's doing it.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not that excited about it. I've been kicked a few times.
Yeah.
And so that's when people say, well, if I had some colostrum from my own cows, from my own herd, would that be good? And I would say yes. It's still the same issue, though. You have to get a beef cow caught and milk her out. And that may or may not even be doable. But if you did, and typically that would be a situation where the calf died, because if she's got colostrum, I want to feed it to her calf. So the only time I would freeze it is if she doesn't have a calf. Well, maybe take that opportunity to milk her out, get some colostrum, freeze it. And we talk about putting it in a gallon plastic bag, freezing it kind of flat in a freezer so it's easy to thaw when I take it out. And you put about 1 to 2 quarts of colostrum in a flat gallon bag. And that's good to have around. The reality is, yeah, I might have that around or I might not. And if I don't, then I'm comfortable using kind of the commercial powdered supplements, and there's several on the market. The strategy that has been used is to talk to a dairy or someone else that has cows and get some colostrum from them. That's kind of really fallen out of favor. A lot of veterinarians have identified that there's some germs you can bring from another operation onto your operation if you bring colostrum from other herds. So I tend to not like that as an option. So either get the calf to suckle his own mother. If I have some colostrum frozen from the herd, from another cow in the herd, that's fine too. And then probably my third choice is the powdered colostrum. And I personally would use the powdered colostrum before I would use colostrum from a cow in another herd.
If you do collect colostrum from your herd, you're going to want to freeze it. And I like your idea of freezing it in a flat bag. You talked about warming it up. That colostrum is full of amino acids, and we don't want those to break down, right?
You're right. I kind of went through that kind of fast because you need to thaw this colostrum, but typically we talk about putting it in hot water. So what I'm thinking of is you fill the sink or a bucket with hot water, put this bag in. And one of the reasons I like the flat bags is you got more surface area and it'll thaw out faster than if it's a fat bag. But don't put it in the microwave, because that's the other tempting way that it would warm it up pretty fast, but it would also break down those proteins that we're trying to get into the calf. So you can't thaw it that fast. And so not boiling water, not a microwave, just hot water, and let it thaw that way.
And the last thing that I would touch on there, we talked about timing, and I'll just say that the timing of this is important, and the rule of thumb, the sooner the better that we can get it into that calf. If it's been an hour or two and he gets it from his mother, he's still fine, because the gut wall is porous or has holes big enough for those proteins to go to until he starts eating, and then it starts closing when those go through. So good tips there, and as always, we appreciate those questions. And I want to switch topics a little bit, and Philip, I'm going to turn to you, and Bob is a baseball fan. He is thinking about spring training. We need to think about that a little bit on our bulls. And so let me set the scenario and say, hey, we're going to start breeding in mid-May. So I've got 50, 60 days. What do I need to be thinking about on my bulls?
One thing we need to make sure, Brad, is that we've got those bulls in good condition at the start of the breeding season. You know, what we want that bull to do during that breeding season is breed cows, not spend his day loafing around. And so he's going to spend less time eating, hopefully. And so he's probably going to lose condition during that breeding season if he's doing his job right. And so we need to make sure he's in a good body condition, probably like a 6 or so, but we don't want him too fat. If we've got him over fat, that can actually have negative effects on libido and sperm development, especially in young bulls. It's a bigger issue in younger bulls than in mature bulls. So there's kind of an optimum there. We don't want him too thin because he'll lose too much weight during the breeding season, and we don't want him too fat because that has negative effects on his ability to breed cows as well. So we've got to hit that target in the middle there.
So that body score 6 that you're talking about, that would be on a 9-point scale that we use on beef, with 1 being very thin, 9 being very fat. 5 is kind of what we'd expect the middle of the road, and 6 would have a little flesh over the ribs. You might not be able to see the ribs very easily. You've got some flesh over the back, and you've got a little bit of fat deposit around the tail head. Is that a fair description of what you're thinking of with a 6, Philip?
Yeah, I think that fits pretty well.
So we kind of want this to be Goldilocks, right? He's right in the sweet spot there of not being too fat, not too thin. What if my bulls are too thin? And I know, Dustin, we've talked a fair bit about costs relative to keeping cows and keeping bulls. And the feed cost is a relatively big percent of what it costs us to keep a cow or a bull. Is that right, Dustin?
Yeah, I mean, generally, if you're thinking about variable costs, it is the largest expense. 60-70% of your total variable cost can be feed. But you got to also keep in perspective, what's the cost of not having a calf?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a little bit different when we think on bulls. But if I've been saving on winter feed costs on my bulls, Philip, and I guess kind of thinking along our spring training theme here, do I want to wait and get in shape right before the season, or do I want to do it slowly, gradually over time?
I'd rather do it a little over time, Brad, so think about the different types of rations or diets that you're going to have to feed to those two different situations. If you wait until, 3-4 weeks before the breeding season and decide, oh man, I got to get this bull into shape so he's ready, I'm going to have to use a pretty high energy diet. I'm probably going to have to use some corn and some starch in that diet. Then when I turn him out with the cows, he's going to go from a moderate starch diet to all grass. And so then he's going to have to switch his rumen bugs over. There's going to be some negative consequences there for a period of time. So what I would rather do is I would rather feed him a little bit of supplement here over the next 2 months and use a high fiber or highly digestible fiber supplement like soybean hulls or wheat midds or distiller's grains that's going to allow the forage that he's eating now, the hay, to still digest well. And so I'm going to get him in good shape with less supplement probably over time. And that transition to the pasture with the cows is going to be a lot easier on him when you turn him out in May.
Absolutely. And I think it's the spring training analogy, right? You go out and you can go out and play your first game without really warming up or getting in shape, and it's going to be a lot tougher. And the problem is the season for the bulls is relatively short and hopefully front end loaded. Hopefully he's got a lot of stuff to do at the front end of the breeding season. So we want to make sure that he is ready to go on day 1, not on day 21.
From the K-State Beef Cattle Institute, Philip Lancaster, Dustin Pendell, Bob Larson, and Brad White. If you'd like to hear the entire podcast or listen back to previous cattle chats, go to ksubci.org and click on the Media tab on the upper right of that page, ksubci.org. We'll take a break now and then return with more for you on this Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State research and extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today, and welcome back. Eric Atkinson here now. Today's agricultural news headlines for you, courtesy in part of DTN. Senate Agriculture Committee Chairwoman Debbie Stabenow and Senate Agriculture Ranking Member John Boozman are taking opposite viewpoints on President Biden's pandemic relief plan, which is moving through Congress under the budget reconciliation procedures. The Senate took up the $1.9 trillion spending bill yesterday afternoon. Stabenow, an enthusiastic campaigner for passage of the bill, it passed the House on Democrat votes last week, is expected to pass the Senate in the same fashion. Stabenow released a report detailing the overall need for the legislation. Meantime, Boozman warned that passage of the bill could trigger statutory pay-as-you-go rules that he says could result in automatic spending cuts to farm programs. Under the statutory pay-as-you-go, the Office of Management and Budget is required to maintain 5- and 10-year scorecards that show the cumulative estimated deficit impacts of legislation, according to Boozman. He says if either scorecard indicates a net increase in the deficit, the OMB is required to order a sequestration of all non-exempt programs, which would include important farm safety net programs. During the opening session of the Commodity Classic this week, leaders of the major commodity groups offered their takes on agriculture's moves to focus more on climate change, as well as the Biden administration's drive to lower greenhouse gas emissions across the economy. A farmer from South Dakota and president of the American Soybean Association, Kevin Scott, talked about the improvements in technology and equipment that have led to reduced tillage and increased crop production. Scott also highlighted the Soy Sustainability Assurance Protocol for exporters, in which the group states to importers that 60% of U.S. soybean products can be labeled as sustainably produced. Meantime, a farmer from Ohio and the president of the National Corn Growers Association, John Linder, said that association has adopted policies supporting market-based voluntary programs for farmers to get paid for sequestering carbon or reducing their emissions. The NCGA policies also seek, he says, to reinforce the benefits of ethanol and its low-carbon, high-octane advantages. And a Texas farmer and rancher and chairman of the National Sorghum Producers, Cody Carson, said that agriculture will need to form more partnerships with other commodity groups or businesses, as well as conservation groups and industries that are net carbon emitters. He says, quoting Carson, "We know we can sequester carbon in the soil. We know we're good at it, but we need to be incentivized instead of mandated on how to do that," in his words. He went on to say, "It bothers me to a large degree that sustainability is the big buzzword right now when we, as farmers, have been doing this for generations," again in Carson's words. And a farmer from Michigan, the president of the National Association of Wheat Growers, David Milligan, said that wheat producers in some regions have been ahead of the curve with no-till practices and switching away from summer fallow. He reiterated that NOG wants to see some incentive-based voluntary carbon programs that allow participation by farmers who've already adopted carbon sequestration practices. Milligan added that sound science is needed to assure that chemical users and consumers that chemicals and pesticides are safe. And we'll have more from the wheat section right now as it's time for this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. With that is Marcia Boswell. Marcia?
A freshly baked treat and a heartfelt note bring much-needed cheer to our friends, families, and neighbors. Whether delivered safely in person or through a ding-dong dash, Kansas Wheat encourages all to use Bake and Take Month as an opportunity to reconnect with our communities through this 50-year-old tradition this March. According to Cindy Falk, nutrition educator for Kansas Wheat, Bake and Take Month started as a promotion to educate consumers about the importance of home baking and the nutritional value of wheat foods. Even more rewarding, this long tradition provides an important way for us to spend time together with our children, our neighbors, and give back to those in need. Bake and Take Month started with Bake and Take Day in 1970 as a community service project of the Kansas Sweethearts in Sumner County, Kansas. The Kansas Sweethearts, an auxiliary organization of the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers, set out to share baked goods with family members, friends, neighbors, and others, generating community goodwill. The idea of a community member sharing a favorite recipe with someone special was so successful that the Kansas Sweethearts created a national Bake and Take Day celebration in 1973, celebrated on the fourth Saturday in March. Although the Kansas Wheat Hearts disbanded in 2001, Kansas Wheat continues to support this tradition. The COVID-19 pandemic limited Kansans' abilities to spend time together last March, but that does not mean the spirit of Bake and Take Month was dampened. We challenged bakers last year to continue connecting with others through baked goods and a handwritten note or a picture from the kids. There are so many people who live alone who would welcome a care package. You never know. Once you get a chance to visit your neighbors in person, you may see your child's drawing posted on the refrigerator, reminding them daily of the special gift you gave. Whichever way you are able to observe Bake and Take Month this March, don your apron, take out your favorite recipe, and use this time to celebrate our relationships with friends and family by baking and sharing together. If you're looking for inspiration, check out our 13 DIY food gift ideas at eatwheat.org. Ideas include homemade brownie mix, chocolate zucchini muffins, chocolate-dipped embossed sugar cookies, pressure cooker donuts, and many more. Check out our website for links to these recipes and more at kswheat.com. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia. And once more, we want to invite you here at the last minute, but you've still time to be part of it, to that K-State Managing Risk and Marketing Grain session online. It is at noon today, and it'll start directly at 12 o'clock with a look at using options, futures, and forward pricing tools to manage risk in grain marketing. K-State agricultural economist Brian Coffey will present that part of the program, and then he'll be followed by K-State's Dan O'Brien. Dan on managing risk in the grain markets with several samples and applications to discuss there. To be part of it, go right away to agmanager.info, agmanager.info, and click on the link on the right-hand side of the page there. It'll take you to the registration and participation particulars on this gathering. Mary Knapp's awaiting to talk Kansas agricultural weather with us in a moment. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
This Agriculture Today concludes with our weekly look at Kansas agricultural weather and the comments from Research and Extension climatologist Mary Knapp. She's across the way now, and we have finished out the month of February, so there had to be, Mary, looking back, record-breaking cold temperatures, were there not?
Yes, there were. In fact, quite a few records fell during that cold spell. We set over 400 daily record low maximum temperatures, and of those, almost a half dozen were all-time record low high temperatures. And it wasn't just on the high temperature side. The low temperature side did break records as well. We had about 260 record low minimum temperatures, and again, a handful of those set all-time records for those lows. And there are more details on that, at least a little bit more detail, in our Ag Climate Update, which was released yesterday in the Agronomy E-Update. So you can check that out and see how that affects the accumulation for our growing degree days in wheat. February was 11 degrees cooler than normal on average, and it ranked as the fifth coldest of record. The warm, and we did have a handful of record high temperatures, but there weren't very as many. It was not enough to offset that super cold condition. The more negative impact wasn't necessarily those cold temperatures, but the lack of moisture. Yeah. It was extremely dry. It was the 18th driest February on record.
And that's not how we want to go into the springtime. And so we did have, as we bring it closer to present day, some rain overnight in southern and western Kansas. To what extent?
We had some areas in western Kansas that saw over an inch of rain, and another widespread distribution of half an inch or more, and we're still getting those numbers in, but that has been very, very welcome in the western parts of the state. It's probably not enough to make any improvement in the U.S. drought monitor, but it is very, very likely to give a boost to that winter wheat or the canola that's out there as our temperatures moderate and they start kicking into gear, they start moving out of dormancy. Having that moisture available will be very beneficial.
What were some of the heavier totals from overnight?
We saw some amounts in the inch and a quarter, 96 hundredths of an inch and 12 hundredths. So some very, very nice amounts. And again, half an inch, 0.65. Some of those amounts were also, again, very welcome. Even in lesser amounts where a couple of locations that had 25 hundredths of an inch or 16 hundredths of an inch, it's still more than a tenth of an inch, and there are places out there that haven't seen that much moisture in 60 to 80 days.
But parts of Kansas whiffed on this one, north, central, and northeast most noticeably.
Right. Pretty much all of the eastern Kansas, from southeast up to northeast, had nothing out of it, and same in central and north central Kansas. We've got cloud cover today. Humidity levels are up a little bit, but not much in the way of actual moisture falling to the ground. And that's going to be a problem because we are moving into our wetter time of the year. Here in Manhattan, we would expect to get between somewhere around 500ths to 600ths of an inch a day. So if we go for an entire week without any moisture at all, we're digging our hole much more rapidly than they would with a dry day out west.
At least, though, Mary, the last few days have been warmer, much more spring-like.
Right. Temperatures have been much more moderate. We've had highs in the 60s and 70s. The week ending last Tuesday averaged about 2 degrees warmer than normal. So, again, an indication that we're moderating that cold. We haven't jumped completely into summer yet, but we certainly have left winter behind, and that has been very, very welcome, especially for the livestock producers who have had a lot of stress on their calving herds at this time with the extreme cold, and that cold was accompanied by snow. Even though it didn't produce a lot of liquid equivalent, it was still stressful for the cattle.
Specifically to the outlook then for the weekend into next week, you say unsettled weather may be in the offing midweek?
Right. At this point, it's kind of hard to say where the precipitation will occur. The quantitative precip forecast is favoring heavier amounts in the eastern part of the state this time around, but we'll just have to see how that low tracks and how it develops. But we might actually get our first thunderstorm of the season with that, so we'll be looking forward to that signal that spring has started to develop.
And temperatures to moderate, you say?
Right. Well, expect temperatures to be fairly close to normal. It may be a little bit on the warm side. We'll still see freezing temperatures for our lows, but our highs will be more regularly in the 60s. We may see a 70 here or there.
Last thing, before we let you go, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention, because of the parched conditions out there and the tinder dry feel, that wildfire caution needs to be front and center once again.
Right. People need to be extremely careful with anything that would spark a fire, and that is everything from all-terrain vehicle, working on fence lines, chopping brush, any of those things that might break out a spark. If the fire starts, it will progress very, very rapidly and exhibit extreme behavior. It'd be difficult to put out. We've seen a number of incidents this last week. 1,000 acres burned in Jackson County, other fires around the state. And again, it won't take much to get it started. And the other unfortunate thing is that we can have wind shifts occur in the midst of that, and that will complicate any control methods that are trying to be implemented. So be very, very cautious. If you are doing a planned burn, make sure you have sufficient personnel on hand to control it, because it's going to be very, very difficult to control.
Very well. Mary, have a good weekend. Thanks for being along with us.
Thanks, Eric.
Research and Extension climatologist at Kansas State University, Mary Knapp with us, and our time once again is away. Enjoy your weekend likewise, and please be back with us here on Monday. Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over this, the K-State Radio Network.